grandfather and uncle. He grew up to be a tradesman where he earned the reputation with great respect and care. With great respect and care, I introduce the next example of healthy masculinity, the Prophet Muhammad and the founder of Islam. But before I go into detail on this amazing man, and he is an amazing man, some ground rules. Islamophobia or hate of any kind will not be tolerated. You will be reported for hate speech and blocked. I'm also asking you to leave your preconceived notions, your misconceptions, your prejudices, and your biases at the door. Because I can assure you, unless you are a Muslim or a religious scholar, you do not know what a wonderful and great man the Prophet Muhammad was, and why he deserves to be on this list. And speaking of religious scholars, the reason I feel comfortable in speaking about this is because of my older brother. He has a PhD in Islamic Studies from Emory University. He's a professor of religion, and he is the smartest guy I've ever met. So when my beautiful friend here asked me to talk about the Prophet Muhammad, you should all be following her, by the way, I reached out to my brother immediately. My brother stated that not only was the Prophet Muhammad a great man, a great example of masculinity, he was also a feminist. And with that, let's get to know the Prophet Muhammad. Born in 570 AD in Mecca, he was orphaned at an early age. He was then primarily raised by his grandfather and uncle. He grew up to be a tradesman where he earned the reputation of being kind, trustworthy, and honest. In fact, his nickname was the Trustworthy One. Around the age of 25, he became a tradesman for a merchant, a wealthy widow named Khadijah. I hope I'm saying that right. Khadijah was a 40-year-old, twice-widowed, single mother who was smart, savvy, and completely taken with him. And the feeling was mutual. So when she proposed to him, he accepted. And they were married very happily for 15 years. His relationship and his respect for her is why he's such a great example of masculinity. And that respect wasn't just for his wife. He explicitly taught that the equality of men and women was a foundation to true spirituality. One was not above the other. He also took numerous important steps to improve the role and status of women in Arabia, dramatically raised the status of women. So let's talk about what he did for women. At the time, female infanticide was common. He abolished it. He referred to the birth of a girl as a blessing. Also at the time, women were considered property and had no civil rights. He gave them the right to have property and also extended inheritance and marital rights. He made it so when a dowry was paid for a bride, the dowry went to her, the bride, and not her father. He also gave women the right to divorce their husbands. And when she did, she got to take her dowry with her. He also stated that the best men are those who are best to their wives. Overall, the reformations that he made raised the status of women in Arabia to higher than any other society in the world at the time. In fact, Muslim women at the time had more rights than women in the Western world would see for more than 1,000 years. What an incredible man. I also want to share some of the things others have said about him. Women's rights activist Annie Besant had this to say, pause to read. And Washington Irving. I also want to share some of the things others have said about him. Women's rights activist Annie Besant had this to say, pause to read. And Washington Irving, again, pause to read. And this is my favorite one from author Reginald Bosworth Smith. And now the last thing I want to touch on is Muhammad's third wife, Aisha. She was a top Islamic scholar, a military commander on camelback, an intellectual authority that Muhammad loved and cherished, proving that strong men do indeed love strong women. With great respect and care, I introduce the next example of healthy masculinity, the Prophet Muhammad and the founder of Islam. But before I go into detail on this amazing man, and he is